Oh, I didn't get a window. Normally, it tells me that we've started a recording. This is going to go to the podcast now. Anyway,
Yeah, it is. You already gave your consent to be recorded. Zoom doesn't care anymore.
welcome to episode question mark of Man Buns and Jesus. I think this is 13 or something. 10.
13. I'll check. You introduced the show. I'll check
I've
how
lost
many
track.
episodes we
But,
have.
my name is Pastor Ben Olschlager. I'm currently residing in the lovely snowy state of Michigan. And this on currently my left, not well, yeah. Anyway, the other guy, that's Pastor Josh Laborious of East Vale, California. Well, East Vale / Corona, California, where he complains about the weather when it gets below 60 degrees.
Yeah, because it's cold. Episode 10, by the way.
Okay, this is episode 10 of Man Buns and Jesus, our theology quote unquote podcast. Uh, we're glad to have you. Josh, what are we talking about today?
Today, we are actually talking about a theological topic. So look at that. Today, we're talking about vocation. And to kind of just start off, vocation as I guess the best synonym, I think, is probably a calling, right? It's a position you've been put in life by God. And I think sometimes people confuse it. Like when you say vocation, when you say calling, people think career, which is what we're going to focus on today. We're going to talk about what is your vocation when it comes to your career, when it comes to your job. But the topic of vocation is much more expansive than that. We're almost certainly going to circle back around to talk about vocation more in context of your family, your friends, your hobbies, and different stuff like that. But today we're talking about vocation when it comes to career, and part of the reason for that is it's the new year, which, regardless of your feelings on New Year's resolutions, it does mark kind of a convenient point for us to say, if things need to change, here's where we're going to change them. And when this is released, we're thinking a lot of people are probably headed back to work if you've been back a day or two, or you're heading back in the near future. So I figured it was a good time to talk about what it means to live as God would have you live in your career, in your job. So that is our topic for this morning. Got anything you want us to start off thinking about, Ben?
Yeah, I think you've already kind of mentioned that, like, colloquially, vocation in most people's brains starts tracking down the path of job, career, things you get paid for, right? Like the yeah, the name of a school where you go to get trained in how to do manual labor is vocational school. And so that term in the world generally does not refer to the same things we think of in theology. And I think that leads to kind of a few points of tension or friction between theological thinkers and like psychologists, or even just like motivational kind of self-help stuff. I think one of the pieces of that I think it's blown up a lot in terms of the way that we talk about vocation is that within the world that we live in, especially in the Western context of the United States, we have this assumption that work and our employment, it's going to be this fulfilling, amazing adventure, and it's going to do everything that we want it to do in terms of, satisfying some itch of how we live. Not only am I going to make money out of this, but also I'm going to just enjoy the heck out of it. Every day is going to be a joy and adventure.
Well, I'll tell you,
That's,
when we were playing tennis at seminary together, we played against um, one of the local school. I think it was actually the intramural team of Wash U we played. And I was talking with the guy in between sets, and I asked it, like, he said he was going into computer science, which was my minor in undergrad. And I said, oh, that's a lot of fun. And he said, oh, no, I hate it, but it's going to pay really well. And like, speaking of what you're talking about, Ben, that hit me as like, that's weird.
Mhm.
Like that doesn't track for me, because it's kind of that idea of do what you love and you never work a day in your life. But I think these two, you like this disconnect between theology and psychology, self-help, whatever you want to call it. I don't think they're either really wrong, because when we talk about vocation as career, like your vocation is played out in your career. Like for us, our maybe more than a lot of careers, but pastor is, you play out your vocation a lot there. But if you're a banker, if you're a lawyer, if you're a plumber, whatever you do, like that is an area where vocation is played out. But I think we're remiss to say that that is it, right? So there's a shortcoming on both sides if you leave one side out.
and
Because
more what I'm,
despite what the I guess what some would tell you, your career is not everything, and having a career is not everything. So
I think more where I was going with that is like, there is this, I'm going to call it a privileged mindset that your career has to be fulfilling. And I think we come at it not necessarily from your career has to be fulfilling, but that your career in and of itself has to be fulfilling. And I think that is one, and like I said, an incredibly privileged mindset, and two, a very broken mindset. Like when you go into a job, even for Josh and I as pastors, there are going to be days that suck. One of my least favorite things to do is just sit down and do grunt computer work. I left engineering because I had to do more of it than I could tolerate. But that doesn't disappear in pastoral ministry. You have to do a lot of organizing. You have to do a lot of assembling services and sermons, and writing devotions and
my
and
rosters and statistics spreadsheet for Edgewater Lutheran Church is, hold on, 1, 2, 3. It has 7 pages. And each one of these spreadsheet pages has like 110 rows of data.
yeah, there's a lot of grunt work that goes into being a pastor, and I don't necessarily enjoy it. But the thing that makes work fulfilling when you don't enjoy it is not the work itself. It's the fact that it is a calling. It is like you're put in this position not because everything about it is going to be fulfilling, but because by doing the work you're doing, you're benefiting others, and that is serving God by serving them.
Yeah, and I think this might sound a little self-helpy, but I think in those situations, right, your fulfillment doesn't necessarily come from the work you do, but it comes from doing it as you've been called to do it. So doing it well, doing like living out your faith and everything we're called to be as Christians through your job. So I guess my example is it's not really from the pastoral ministry, because I got to be totally honest, there's not a whole lot I have to do for Edgewater that I don't enjoy doing. Like I like the rosters and statistics. I enjoy prepping for sermons and stuff. Like I enjoy the whole gambit of things, at least so far. There are some hard conversations, but as we talked about in the last podcast, I even kind of enjoy those. I'm going to go back to my undergrad, where I worked for an establishment called Vanderbilt Campus Dining. Tagline was quality, 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 and that was such a steaming pile of crap. I did not enjoy my job. It was not like making omelets for entitled fellow students, not on my list of top 10 things I feel fulfilled by. Making sweet tea with the instruction, add sugar until it stops dissolving, also not on my list of things that are like fulfilling for, and like that's not even really serving my neighbor. That's giving my neighbor diabetes, and that's not cool.
Type 2.
Type 2.
Type 2.
Type 2. I'm not genetically altering anybody here.
But with that quantity of sugar,
Baking
you
fresh
might be.
cookies I did enjoy, I guess, that part of the job. But I tell you, a lot of these shifts, especially, so I worked Saturday mornings, which for those of you who have been on a college campus recently, no one wants to work Saturday mornings for various and obvious reasons. But I did, and starting in my second year there, I didn't just work Saturday mornings. I came in 2 hours early to work on Saturday mornings. So the shift typically started at 9. I showed up at like 7:30 to start setting up, to start like getting things so that the rest of the shift would be less stressful for everyone else. And what was fulfilling of that was I was doing it well. I knew that for whatever reason, God had put me in that position, I'm not going to call it a career, put me in that job. And I did it with honesty. I kept my time card honestly. I dealt with my managers, with my coworkers honestly. I treated especially once I was a manager, I did my best to treat coworkers with compassion. So the job wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't even the services necessarily I was providing. It was that opportunity to do it well, that opportunity to live as Christ would have me live, even in that situation, is what was fulfilling. And I think if you take that attitude, there is that fulfillment of vocation. And I think that's the case with a lot of things God tells us to do. He's like, this is how I designed you to work. This is how I designed the world to work. Live that way and things are going to go well. So shocker, when we do that with our careers, with our jobs, and we kind of live as God has instructed us to, things tend to go better for us. Is kind of my take on the whole fulfillment thing.
And I think another piece of it is like, when you do a job that just kind of objectively stinks. I had 2 jobs in undergrad that I think could kind of qualify in that position. One of them, I also worked for dining services at Velpo. I worked in our campus cafe. I was either making pizza or restocking our like little convenience store thing.
We called them Munchie Marts. They were open 24/7.
Don't even remember what ours was called. Ours was not open 24/7. Thank God. But I had that job, and then I had another job on the weekends doing what they called policing dorms. Essentially, we did bare bones janitorial work on all of the on-campus dorms, or not all of them, but the majority of the on-campus dorms for about 6 hours on Saturday and Sunday. And I've seen more crap and vomit than I ever have cared to see in my life. And
I would say that qualifies as a crappy job.
Yeah, I think so too. And thanks for the finger guns, Josh.
No problem.
There were just elements of those jobs that suck, especially the policing dorms job. I think I went through like 10 coworkers that year, 10 student coworkers. They'd come, they'd work for 2 months, they'd quit. They'd come, they'd work for 2 months, they'd quit. And every time that one of the other students would quit, they'd keep coming back to me and going, do you have any other friends that want a job? Because like you keep showing up, you're actually kind of cheerful about this. You do your job, you make our days a little brighter, and like you don't complain. What's up with you? Like, and I brought a couple other people onto the job too that needed work and like didn't mind dealing with the mess, and um, it worked out great. Um, and like kind of the same thing making pizzas. You know, nobody really wants to be a cook on the fryer line, but that's that's what a couple of people I worked with had to do all the time. And you know, if I could come in, do my job, do it well enough that they felt like I could take some pressure off of them, and you know, brighten their day up a little bit, I felt like that was the pinnacle of my accomplishments for the day. And that, that was always more fun to me uh, than doing my homework. But it was still a job that kind of sucked. But like being there with the people made it more rewarding. Being able to serve those people to me made it more rewarding. And I didn't do it for the job. I did it for the people.
And I think if we look at kind of shifting this to a more theological look, like that is the driving force, I think, in a lot of Jesus' ministry and a lot of his teachings is a people focus. He does things for the sake of the people around him, for the people he is teaching, for the people they know. And I think like our examples here are bad jobs. Well,
Mhm.
maybe not bad. Well, bad jobs.
Dirty jobs. Don't say bad.
Yeah. Well, and even jobs that most people wouldn't enjoy,
There you go.
I think is a fair way to describe them. But I think that a lot of these same principles hold even if you're in a job you love. So, we talked a little bit about what it's like to be a pastor, which kind of makes it easier, I think, to keep that focus of like, let's live how Jesus called us to live, because that's like our shtick, right? Like that's literally part of our ordination vows is to live a life. I forget how it's phrased, but live a life appropriate to the office.
It's
But like
something like that. Yeah.
if you think, say you're a lawyer and you love your job, or you're a banker, or you're a doctor, or a chiropractor, or a teacher, or a principal, like a lot of these same principles hold, right? And just what comes to mind for me is like doing your job, going through your career with the fruit of the Spirit, with love, with joy, with peace, with patience, with kindness, all those kind of things. But I think even maybe even more helpful than that is the Sermon on the Mount and kind of Jesus's ethical teachings there. And the two that come to mind immediately for me, for two very, very different reasons. First is honesty. So in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus teaches, he teaches to just let your yes be yes and your no be no, to not take oaths. And what I believe he's driving at there is live a life of such profound and radical honesty that when you say yes, people take you at your word. Your word is good enough because you are such a consistently honest person. So this, I think, plays directly into your job, to live honestly. That means when you mess up, you are upfront with your boss. You say, yeah, I'm the one who screwed the pooch on this one, which is tough. And you know what? There might be some negative consequences for that. If you are in a really high-powered job and you mess up and you're upfront and you admit that, you might get fired, or you might be kind of brought down lower than you are. But you're called to honesty regardless, and that is part of your vocation. So I think that's something that really kind of stands out to me of when we talk about how do we live out our vocation as Christians in various careers, I think a big part of it is honesty. But another one for totally different reasons is Jesus teaching on lust in the Sermon on the Mount. Like, it's made the news so much. People in different positions of power are like, it's coming out, oh, they were sexually harassing everyone and all, like, and
Did you hear the most recent one?
I don't know that I have.
One of the main characters from Sex and the City, which feels appropriate somehow, has been accused of inappropriate things by like 3 or 4 women.
But like, Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, he teaches that even if you look at someone with lustful intention in your heart, this is not action. These are not words. These are just thoughts. He says, you have committed lust with them.
Mm-hmm.
So he's driving us away from that. Like, can you imagine all of these people, if they had that attitude toward their job of like, I'm not even going to let my thoughts go there. Well, a lot of them might still be employed today. Like, it's when we think about how do our Christian callings apply to our vocation. I mean, the purest motivation is Jesus told us to live this way, so we should live this way consistently. But also, some of these have some potential to keep you out of situations you do not want to be in. You live honestly, you're never going to get caught in a lie because you're not lying. If you're avoiding lust, even in your thoughts, you're never going to get fired and arrested and charged with sexual harassment. Like, these laws fundamentally, like, God designed the world to work this way. So fancy that when we actually like live according to them, things go better for us. I mean, it's just astonishing how that works.
Yeah. I don't really have anything to add to that part. I think just one of the things that kind of comes to mind for me, this is maybe a bit of an off the wall vocational parallel here too, but thinking about Jacob as he's preparing to marry both of his wives. His vocation at that point was essentially farmhand, right? His responsibility was to help tend the flocks of his uncle and do a good job. And if he did that for long enough, he would be allowed to marry one of the daughters. And he was shooting for one, got the other one. But rather than, being a jerk about it, he just put his head down, worked for another 7 years, and married the other one. Doesn't necessarily completely parallel to our modern day culture, but like, he worked hard, he prospered the flocks.
Well, and I think something worth throwing in there is he was not benefiting from that. Later in the story he does. He's rewarded for all of his work, but he's not coming out of this with like a nifty pension.
Mm-hmm.
The only one who's really benefiting from this situation is Laban, the guy he's working for, who his flocks are prospering, he's getting free labor, and his daughters are now taken care of, right? And I think that, and my apologies if I'm jumping in on whatever point you were driving at, but that kind of makes me draw to, I think that, and I can only speak for kind of the culture I see, but in America today, we are more entitled as workers than we are called to be. We're so quick to say, well, I deserve this, or my boss has to treat me a certain way. And it's like, you're called to live right. You're not really, entitled to much,
Mhm.
right? And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how this plays into this quote unquote great resignation, or I think I saw it somewhere else just called the big quit.
I think on some level, you're right. I think on some level, there's like a we are entitled as workers, we're privileged as workers, where, if the job doesn't meet our expectations, we walk away. But I think on some level too, people are missing having the people around them also respect their career as a vocation. Because if you work in an office or you work in a company that doesn't really value your work as like an extension of you as a human being, but they value your work purely in a monetary form, like there are likely some things that are very upsetting about the culture of that office place. And so on some level, yeah, there's a level of entitlement there, but I think on some level too, it's just people are sick of trying to fix sin in their office places. Um, and so I think there's kind of a twofer there. Like
Yeah.
if if I'm as a Christian called to um, live and serve and work in a place where I'm expected to give my best, where I'm expected to serve God through my actions, where I'm expected to um, serve and produce bountifully, I kind of expect that the people around me will see that and do the same. And if I see none of that, it's hard to stay in that
Yeah.
because after a while it just gets grating and the sin feels overwhelming and you feel the need to step back. And I think even people who are outside the faith on some level recognize
Because we
the
all are fundamentally built a certain way.
yeah, yeah. And I
Um,
think the people outside the church recognize that like almost unjustness of the system that encourages people to take advantage of one another rather than to serve one
yes. So I think there's a balance that has to be, and I want to start this example with I know very little about unions and the whole, but I'm using an example based on what I remember from high school history classes and what I kind of see today. Um, back, I remember hearing stories in history class of unions um, back when workers were treated as expendable in almost every possible sense of the word. And unions kind of came together to protect the well-being of workers and kind of recognize that there does have to be this work-life balance idea. So like in that sense, I think it's entirely appropriate that they came into existence. But what I see, and I'm going to speak into this because I have some connections with with situations like this. But take for example, there are some places in the country where there are teachers unions, and I'm not speaking of, man, I shouldn't have even started on this road. I'm not talking about California's teachers union. I do not know enough about California's teachers union, what they do, what they don't do. Like I don't, but there are some places in the country that I am familiar with where teachers unions at this point in history in 2021 mostly just serve to protect bad teachers. They make it almost impossible for bad teachers to be fired, even though they really should be. So I would say that's probably an overcorrection where there is a little bit of entitledness going on. And I have someone very close to me. She is in a management position, and the burden on her because now workers there is I think as a society, there's a balance to be struck, but I think our current overcorrection is toward the entitled worker. Um, she struggles incredibly as a manager because everyone thinks that the workplace has to revolve around them, and they don't have the bigger picture. They think, well, I need this time off. I need to only be scheduled this way. I need to be this. I need to be taken care of this way. And it's very, like, I've seen its effect on her, and it's draining. So I think part of our vocation, the vocation of the manager, is to take care of the workers or the owner or whoever's in charge. It is called for that balance, but the worker, part of the vocation as worker is also to remember that your boss, your manager, whatever the case may be, is also a person who needs compassion and grace and to be cared for. I worked as a manager for campus dining for a while, and I'll tell you, like, people would actually, I had very few people complain because schedules worked out by the grace of God with everybody's kind of whatever in mind. But like when I was scheduling, I wasn't thinking of individuals and whether I liked or didn't like a certain person. It was mostly just, here's what you've given me, here's what I have to fill. How do I match these as closely as I can? And I think most managers are probably there, where they're trying to do the best they can for the workers, and it's like everyone can't get everything they want. And part of the vocation as manager is to kind of fight that battle and try and protect and lift up your workers. But part of your vocation as an employee is to show the grace, the patience, the love for the people over you as well.
Yeah.
Keep the tension, as Bierman would say.
Yeah, it's 100% a two-way street. And I think moving into takeaways, I think moving into takeaways, I think my takeaway from this discussion is that we need to recognize the humanity within our career, whether that's our coworkers, our employers, our boss, and work to improve the humanity of the other, rather than work to bring fulfillment to ourselves. Like the fulfillment and humanity of the other should be the priority in our career, not necessarily our own. And in a lot of ways that will bring us, a good measure of joy and grace and all sorts of other things, but it might not always be the most fulfilling and enjoyable thing in the world. How about you, Josh? What are you taking away?
I think my takeaway from this is just to play by a consistent set of rules, to live consistently. So if you're a Christian, you're striving to live faithfully, with honesty, with the fruits of the Spirit, with everything. Those rules don't get left at the door when you walk into your job. So I think my takeaway is just be a Christian 24/7, not just when you're with the people you like, doing the things you like to do. So
cool. So some prayer takeaways for today. I think one of the things that we've kept coming back to is the humanity of the people in the workplace, and how we approach that, and how we approach serving God in the midst of all of that. And so I think, as a human in a workplace, if that is in any way reflective of you, if you volunteer somewhere that has employees, if you are an employee, if you are working with employees of somewhere, consider their humanity, whether it's a supervisor, a coworker, someone working under you. There is a lot there that you can do to serve them, to pray for them, to uplift them in their work as well. I think another one is to think about and pray about what role your career takes in your life. Is your career almost idolatrous in that you're seeking fulfillment through it rather than using that as a tool that God has given you to do life in all of its different aspects? And then finally, and I think this one is maybe a little bit more specific, but if you are one of those people that finds yourself perhaps in the tide of the great or the big quit, the
I don't know if we should stick with that. The same people who use that language called depression the big sad.
okay, so if
It's
you find
Reddit.
yourself in the great resignation, I want you to think about what is causing you to think poorly about your place of employment. Is it a place that you feel like you've poured your heart and soul into in the way that God has called you to, and not only is there a silence to like bringing positive, not positive, bringing godly workplace attitudes into the workplace, but it even runs counter to that? Or is it a place where you just find yourself dissatisfied because the work you do is not fun? Is it really is it a justice issue or is it a you issue? Weigh those two things against each other and let that be kind of the litmus test for your decision. Because more than anything, it's going to be a tough decision, but make sure it's the right decision so that even in quitting, you're recognizing the humanity of your coworkers. Josh, you got anything else before we go?
I think we're good with that.
Sounds good. With that, brothers and sisters in Christ, go in peace. Serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.